This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Bruchim Abam, welcome everyone. Thank you everyone for coming to our Wednesday night Shiur, Parshas Korach. So, Zoom and Korach. Just like Korach zoomed into the ground, so we're going to learn about Hilchos Zoom. So what do I mean we're going to learn about Hilchos Zoom? This is really the fourth Shiur in the subject, we're calling it Toras Corona, halachic dilemmas that came up during the COVID epidemic, or pandemic, they call it. And one very interesting question that many people asked is that, of course, especially Pesach time, we like to have our Sidarim with extended family, with multi-generational. We like to have grandparents, parents with us. And many, for the first time, had to have a Seder by themselves. Many young families conducted a Seder for the first time on their own. Many parents, for the first time, had a Seder without their kids there. Many grandparents were isolated. Many older people. What are older people? Nobody here, of course, is older. Older people are people like over 110, But many older people were isolated. And the question was, perhaps, under the circumstances, there could be an allowance, so we flip on the computer before Yom Tif, and maybe we could conduct the Seder via Zoom or Samach Kuf Yud Yud Pei. You know what that is in Hebrew? Skype, right? That's also another option. Or Zayin Vav Mem. Zayin Vav Mem is Zoom with a Shuruk. Yeah, those were the two options. And in fact, Rav Asher Weiss, in his Kuntris on Minchas Asher, Leket Shiurim Etshuvos, regarding the Magefa of Corona, he says that many Choshev Rabbanim actually allowed. They gave a heter to use Skype and Zoom to be able, obviously, there's a great sairech. You can make the case that an old person all by themselves, it's somewhat of a chayla, somebody who doesn't have company, maybe it's even very much affects a person's health. The person certainly needs interaction, human interaction, and under the circumstances, perhaps it is permitted to use Zoom. Obviously, you're going to turn on the computer before Shabbos, but maybe could we even turn on the computer on Shabbos? And this gets involved in a very interesting question.
Why did it come out with this now? It should have come out before Pesach, so I could have been prepared. I could have done it.
The answer is Rav Asher Weiss came out with it, but I didn't have it, so I'm doing it now.
What about the Indian of if it's a chayla? What about the Gat Labincha?
Or we got to Labincha, right? That would be maybe perhaps a kiyum. It doesn't say Vigad to Labincha that they have to physically be there. You have to tell them, however you could tell them,
Anytime, doesn't say.
So would this be a kiyum of Vigad to Labincha? Yeah. Okay, so Rav Asher Weiss says a number of Rabbanim allowed the use of Zoom on Yom Tif, and he says, in my humble opinion, there's a chash chilo Shabbos and chilo Yom Tif midai raisa. Now, where do these Rabbanim come from? How did they allow the Zoom? They relied on two factors. Number one, many of the chashuv poskim of the Edus HaMizrach, maybe of the Sephardic category, they were of the opinion that there's no issur to use electricity on Yom Tov. In fact, the Aruch HaShulchan wrote, you're allowed to use electricity on Yom Tov.
He wasn't a Sephardi. He was Hungarian.
True. He wasn't Hungarian.
That's what?
No, he lived in... No. Epstein, I think... Maybe from Russian. The Benavista family, originally actually Spanish, if you're interested. But if you look in the Tartamima's autobiography, but the Aruch HaShulchan was okay. But be it as it may, the Aruch HaShulchan wrote in a kuntris called Kovetz Beis Vad L'Chachamim, that was now published in Shalos HaTshuvos Aruch HaShulchan, that they were of the opinion that electricity was permitted to use on Yom Tif, because in their view, the way electricity works is that the same way on Yom Tif you're allowed to light one fire from another, right? L'tzorach Yom Tif. If somebody needs to cook, or if somebody needs to get a hold of a fire, We're not going to talk about that, but if somebody needs a fire, they could light one candle from another. To generate a fire initially is not even an Isser D'Oraisa on Yom Tov, it's only Moiled. Right? By the way, it's interesting, Shaila. Let's say a person forgot to turn on his fire for Yom Tov. Could you get a guy to turn on your gas range on Yom Tov? So the halacha is on Shabbos, you cannot ask a guy. Why can't you ask a guy? Because there's something called Amir La'akum. You can't tell a guy to do a Melacha D'Oraisa for you. But turning on a fire on Yom Tov is not a Melacha D'Oraisa. It's Tzarech Yom Tov. It's Hutra. Elamai, turning on a fire is only an Isser D'Rabbanan of Moiled. So Amir La'akum, on a D'Rabbanan, B'makoim Tzarech or Makam Mitzvah is Mutter on Yom Tov. So Shabbos, if let's say your dining room lights are off on Shabbos, you may not tell a guy to turn it on. And if a guy comes in and turns it on, you have to leave the room. You can't get benefit from it. But on Yom Tov, you could ask a guy to turn on a fire or turn on the light, because turning on a fire is only D'Rabbanan. Many poskim, what? It's not Bishal Akum. You're putting the food on the fire. It's certain. The fact it's a kula that we sometimes allow a Jew to turn on the fire, and we say that's also considered cooking, even though the guy is doing the cooking. But doing the cooking is the real cooking, not turning on the fire. So many poskim held turning on electricity is permitted, because in their view, the way they understood electricity when it first came out is they somehow imagined that there was some kind of latent fire in the wires, and when you're turning it on, you're just transferring it from one area to another, like transferring one fire to another. And that's what the Aruch HaShulchan himself wrote. However, that's number one. And number two, says Rav Asher Weiss, aside from the fact that there are poskim that said that electricity is permitted, but even if you're going to say that turning on electrical appliance is usur, maybe it's only usur to turn it on. But so fine, I'll turn on the Zoom before Yom Tov, and it's going on Yom Tov. In other words, even if you want to say that it's prohibited to turn on an electrical appliance, here are some sheets, on Yom Tov, but if it's on already, why can't you use it? Well, what would be wrong with going in front of an already a Zoom that's already going, and start and talking into it? I'm not, what am I doing wrong? I'm just talking to a guy, Sruli Markowitz. How you doing? Am I doing a malacha by talking to you? No, you're watching on Zoom. I'm talking to you on Zoom. I don't even know if we met before, right? So they were of the opinion that there's no Isser to utilize an electrical appliance that already was on from before Yom Tov. These were the two Haterim of many Chashav Rabbanim. Again, number one, that perhaps there's no Isser to use electricity on Yom Tov, and number two, certainly if it's on already, you can make use of it. However, says Rav Asher Weiss, on both accounts, they were dead wrong. Number one, we do not paskin you're allowed to use an electrical appliance on Yom Tov. We do not paskin you're allowed to turn on an electrical appliance on Yom Tov. The Aruch HaShulchan said you're allowed to. The Aruch HaShulchan himself says it could be ein mamish b'dvarai. It could be that what I'm saying is not correct. Mishum she'eino baki b'inyan hachashma. I don't really understand how electricity works. But now we understand there's no latent fire hiding in the wire that you're merely bringing from one place to another. When you turn on a switch, you're creating a circuit. It might be binyan according to the Chazon Ish. It might be moiled. It might even be eish. In other words, it could be there's a certain element of heat that is generated by completing an electric circuit. And therefore we paskin, you cannot turn on an electric appliance on Yom Tov. It is not like the Aruch HaShulchan says that it's mutter. It's not. It might even be, possibly, could be the D'Oraisa. Now, in general, you should know, we maintain that electricity is D'Rabbanan. We don't really say it's binyan, and we don't really say it's eish, because it's not really hot inside. But it's some kind of moiled or some kind of perhaps binyan D'Rabbanan, and that's a separate subject, that's a separate topic. If you want to hear about that, you could go to an old Vayakel Shiur where we spoke about what is the Isser of electricity. But at the very least, it's an Isser D'Rabbanan. But, what?
Okay, utilizing it if you turn it on before Yom Tov?
So what about if you turned it on before Yom Tov? Says Rav Asher Weiss, it is still absolutely prohibited, and it could be even an Isser D'Oraisa to utilize a Zoom, to go to a Zoom and to talk to somebody on the Zoom on Yom Tov. Why? Because every movement you make, every decibel you raise your voice, every inflection you make with your voice, you're changing the circuitry and the operating system of the electronic appliance. The sound waves are converted to electrical impulses. That is a direct cause through your action, even though maybe you'll say it's a grama, but this is not a grama. It's meant to do this. It's orchestrated and it's made to respond to your voice, to respond to your movement, to go in front of the Zoom and to talk to someone in it. Says Rav Asher Weiss, it is chash malacha d'oraisa. That's why no God-fearing person talks on a telephone on Shabbos. No God-fearing person talks on a microphone on Shabbos.
The same issue when you walk in front of any camera. And you walk somewhere where there's security. You're making your image come up somewhere.
So how could you walk in front of a video camera on Shabbos? So a few things. First of all, if you don't know it's there, so it's lo yasik adaite. You're not even aware it's there.
You have one in your house.
But if you know it's there, so if you know the camera's there, you don't want it to take a picture of you. You don't want it to be working. You're not. After Shabbos, you're not going to put popcorn in the microwave and eat microwave popcorn and watch this really great show of you walking into your house. You don't care that you're being videoed on your camera. So it's what is called loy nichale. It's psik reisha, right?
Not loy nichale. Somebody.
For you, it's
knocks on your door Shabbos afternoon. You go to your camera. Look what it is. There's a screen.
Then you can't do that.
So you have to turn it off before Shabbos.
It's better to I do.
There was a big shayla.
You know, unless if you need it for security, it's a little bit of a different shayla. Again, let's talk about the difference here. The person who sets up the camera. So what's the person who sets up the camera doing? He's not doing anything. He set it up Erev Shabbos. So he didn't do anything. He didn't do any malacha. The person who is videoing doesn't want to be videoed. He doesn't want his voice to be heard. He doesn't want his image to be captured. So for him, it's loy nichale mamish. But in the case of the Zoom, I want Eli Sackwile to hear what I'm saying on the shiur. That's why I'm telling it. That's why I'm talking into it. I want to use it, so I'm using it. I want my sound waves to be converted to electrical impulses to be converted back to sound waves. I want my image to appear. So I'm utilizing electricity. So the person who utilizes the microphone, who utilizes the Zoom, who utilizes the telephone wants to use that technology. Then the camera case, the guy who set up the camera is not doing anything, and the guy who's being videoed doesn't want it. So you'll say, but it's still psik reisha de loy nichale, you know? But it could be with the camera also. It's you're not conscious of it. You're not aware of it. And it might even be loy asik adaite. But there are poskim who say that if you know there's a camera, you shouldn't walk in front of it. I remember in my old building in Queens, the Talmidim of Rav Hershel Schachter would not walk in through the front door. They would go in through the side door. I don't know if they knew that there was a camera on the side door also, but there are poskim who say you cannot, if you know there's a camera, you cannot walk in front of it. Now, Bismanas, I don't know how to avoid it. Every corner has a camera. Every home has a camera. Many cars have a camera. Obama has a camera watching wherever you go.
So they have the shine in the old city because of all the security.
Well, right. What about the camera at the kotel? You know, can you go to the? Can you keep the camera on? Can you walk there?
Yeah.
So there might be a heter of safety of the Rabbim. Safety of the Rabbim is a valid heter. But here it is, it's my house, there's no svar of Rabbim. So like this, if a person... There seems to be machlokes between Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan and Mishnah Berurah. Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan has a kula. The bottom line is, if somebody needs it for security, it could be yesh ami lismaich. But to use the Zoom, to purposely, intentionally go to the Zoom and say, "Hi everyone, ma nishtana halayla." So you projecting your voice, you want to utilize the technology. Rav Asher Weiss says it's asur. And besides that, he says that whenever you open up doors and you allow leniencies in the area of technology, it's a very, very slippery slope. This is a very slippery slope. because this year someone's going to get a heter. My Rav told me I could use Zoom. And next year the Corona is, nobody's going to even remember Corona. People are going to think Corona is a park in Queens. And they're going to say that, I got a heter to use Zoom. I don't have to invite my in-laws this year for Pesach. Schwieger, guess what? This year you're not invited. We're going to Zoom you in. What do you mean? You can't do it now? We got a heter last year. And you're not going to have to go to Shabbos, Sheva Brachos. You're not going to have to do anything anymore. You could use Zoom. So it's a very slippery slope. The bottom line is, Rav Asher Weiss says, number one, we do not use electricity on Yom Tif. And number two, even if it's on before Yom Tif, he says you can't do it. Next question. So, says Rav Asher Weiss, they were, I'll read to you his lashon. They didn't know how electricity works. The early poskim didn't really understand how electricity works. They thought there was some kind of fire in there that you're tapping into.
The original Shiur was by Chaim Oizer, I believe, right?
Yeah.
But that was totally discounted later on.
Certainly what the Aruch HaShulchan says is not accepted as normative halacha today. There's a famous tshuva in the Achiezer of Reb Chaim Oizer about electricity. One of the earliest writings on electricity is Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and when his tshuva came out, so they said about him, Or Chadash al Tzion Tayar. Okay, next interesting question is, this was brought to Rav Asher Weiss's attention from Harav Hagoyin, no name, a Rav of a Yishuv. This is in Tshuva Membeis, page 7 on your sheets. He says, by the way, if anybody wants all 9 pages, I'm happy to give it to you afterwards. I have the whole booklet. The next question is like this. He's afraid that he's in a Mesorati Yishuv, traditional Yishuv, where the people generally say the Haggadah. Perhaps they're not fully observant, but certainly they are accustomed to saying the Haggadah. But that's when the whole family's together, the grandparents, the parents. But this Rav was afraid, people being on their own, he didn't think that there's any way many people would get through the whole Haggadah, or at least they'll attempt to start the Haggadah, and they'll call it quits right after Halach Ma'anya. In other words, it's like, when people daven by themselves. When you daven in a shul, you could daven the whole davening. When you daven on your own, you see how people daven on the plane. They say, Baruch Sha'amar Ashrei Yishtabach, in the first bracha of Shemona Esrei, at the most. But people in the shul, all of a sudden, have bigger attention spans. So the question was asked, can this Rav sort of make, the Cliff Note edition of the Haggadah? Could he condense the Haggadah for the sake of ensuring that people hit, the highlights of the Haggadah? And a part of the question is, what are the highlights of the Haggadah? Okay. That's a good point. Rabbi Yehuda. So in other words, we'll make a ham, that's halach manya manishtana, that's avodah mayinu v'hisha amda, and we can Pesach Matzah Umar. So basically, Rav Asher Weiss said like this: whenever you're dealing with Jewish liturgy, it's always dangerous to condense it, because now what's the difference between your edition of the Haggadah and the conservative or the Reform edition of the Haggadah? We have to be very careful tampering with Jewish liturgy that's from time immemorial. However, a specific kehila or a specific rav under certain circumstances is authorized to say, okay, for this year, for my people, I know my people, I'm going to make a little bit of a shortened edition. You can't do it across the board, you can't make it widespread, but you could, for your people at a certain time, you're authorized to make, for instance, there was a big machlokes between Reb Shach and Reb Elyashiv when it came to the kinnis about adding the kinnis for the Holocaust. Reb Shach said, B'shum oifen, you cannot say the kinnis for the Holocaust. Reb Shach held the kinnis were written by Tanoim, by Bali Ruach HaKodesh, and for someone of this century to put in a kinnah, it doesn't matter who they are. They're not Bali Ruach HaKodesh. It doesn't matter if they're a Rav, a Rebbe. They don't come close to Reb Elazar HaKalir. They don't come close to Rishonim, and it's disparaging to Rishonim to put in compared to what Rishonim wrote, Reb Lezer HaKalir said Shemos, and he went up to Shamayim when he composed the Kinnos. How dare anybody write about the Holocaust as a Kinnah? You want to talk about it? Talk about it. You can't compose a Kinnah. And Reb Elyashiv did not disagree. But Reb Elyashiv told Reb Shach, we're not going to do it in every shul. This shul will say this Kinnah, maybe that shul will say a different Kinnah. You know, you have of the Bavava Rebbe, you have a Reb Schwab, you have this Kinnah. But Reb Elyashiv said, of course, I'm asking, you can't legislate throughout the Jewish people, everyone's going to say this Kinnah about the Holocaust. We're not allowed to do that. You know, when it comes to questions about Misha Berachs for various things, one of the main oppositions to it is that we are not authorized to add tefillos to the formatted liturgy. Because in a way, it's insulting to the great people who compose these tefillos for somebody of a much, much lesser caliber to chime in and put in their additions. So, by the way, so Rabbi Yashiv allowed, but to put as an official kinnah, every shul has to say the Baba Rebbe, every shul has to say Reb Schwab. Reb Shach said you can't do it, and Reb Elyashiv said you can't do it.
They had later, much later, additions
to the Siddur?
To Slichas.
Like what?
And when they burned 42 wagons in Paris.
In the year 1240, that was a while ago, by the way.
Yes, but that was much later than
that was before my time,
That was before the Kinnis were...
You're right, but that was in the time of early Rishonim. That was the time of the Marami Rothenberg. That was written by the Marami Rothenberg.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about Rishonim. So Rishonim have the capacity to...
Rishonim are closer to it.
So, ich weiß,
In there that you're not allowed to be Meiser.
Right, in the Kinnah about the Crusades, he says, Ein lanu lahaisef, we can't add, we could just sort of join up for Tisha B'Av. Okay.
When was Yiskar instituted?
Probably when accountants started doing billing in the shuls. I don't know. Yeah. When shuls needed money, Yiskar started. Okay, so basically Rav Shawai said, but if in your community, under the circumstances, you need to basically write a Cliff Notes edition of the Haggadah, so then it's a mitzvah to do so. Regarding what are the Ikarim of the Seder, so everybody knows, that's what the Mishnah Berurah brings down, and Rav Asher Weiss adds, of course, Manishtano and Avodah Mayinu, we're Maschel Begnus, we're Masayim B'Shvach, and as well as, if a person has times, Hallel as well. Okay, this is a Geshmaka Shaila. This is a really good Shaila. You ready for this? Raise your hand if you were in quarantine. You don't have to admit. Raise your hand if you spent time in quarantine. Okay, it was best time of my life, right? It's the best thing in the world. So, during quarantine, you weren't allowed to get a haircut. It was mamash asur to get a haircut. You had to follow the government regulations, and you had to follow the halacha. Leich ami ba b'chadarecha. So let's say a person came out of quarantine on Cholamayid. Can you get a haircut on Cholamayid? This is a very interesting shaila and a very interesting teretz. It's Mem Daled on your sheet. What does it have to do with Zoom? Nothing. After Yom Tov, you could tell people on Zoom that you got a haircut on Cholamayid. If you're allowed to, that's what it has to do with Zoom. Or you could tell the barber to give you a very fast haircut. He should Zoom. So the question is anyone allowed to take a haircut on Cholamayid? So the Gemara that says in Shulchan Aruch in some Tav Kuf Lamed Aleph, even if someone was an anus before Yom Tov and he couldn't. Let's say someone's car broke down before Yom Tov and he couldn't take a haircut. You're not allowed to take a haircut on a Cholamayid. Or if somebody was in the hospital before a Cholamayid, or someone was sick before Yom Tov and they come out on Yom Tov, they cannot take a haircut. Who could take a haircut? Number one, someone who's in captivity and got out on Yom Tov. Someone who was in jail and got out on Yom Tov, even if he was in a Jewish jail and he could have taken a haircut in the Jewish jail. And number three, someone who was in Cherem and he got out on Yom Tov. Or someone who took a neder that he's not going to take a haircut and he was mater neder on Yom Tov. Now, or someone who comes from overseas and arrives on Cholamayid or arrives close to Yom Tov can take a haircut on Cholamayid. So now we have to understand, why is someone who is sick and recovers cannot take a haircut? Why is somebody who his car broke down cannot take a haircut, but someone who's let out of jail or someone who is mater neder could take a haircut? What's the difference between the two? And the question is it only someone who comes out of captivity? Only someone who gets out of jail? Only someone who is mater neder? What's the reasoning of these cases? And is it limited to those cases? Ein lecha bai ela chidushay. Now, the makar of this halacha is in the Gemara in Moed Katan. The Gemara in Moed Katan says, taking a haircut on Chol Hamoed is not a malacha. There's no Isser malacha on taking a haircut on Chol Hamoed. The Isser to take a haircut on Chol Hamoed is we are afraid that if someone doesn't take a haircut before Yom Tif, he's going to enter Yom Tif like a shlamazel, a shlamiel, and a shlump, and a zhlub, and all those bad things. He's going to come into Yom Tif kishehu menuval. It's a gzeira shalot tikanes l'regel kishehu menuval. So it's not a malacha. It's just to ensure that someone comes into the Yom Tif kempt. So what if somebody is in oinus and he was not able to take a haircut? So it depends what kind of oinus. If he was healed, cannot take a haircut. If he had an oinus, he can take a haircut. But if he got out of jail or out of captivity or he was mater neder, he can take a haircut. What is the difference between them? So one would mistakenly think, because the Gemara says that the reason is, what if somebody lost an Aveda? Let's say somebody on Erev Yom Tov lost something, I don't know. He lost his marbles, let's say. He had a marble collection in his pocket, and he lost his marbles. And the whole day Erev Yom Tov he's looking for his marbles, and he couldn't take a haircut. So he cannot take a haircut on Yom Tov, on Chol Hamoed. The Gemara says because it's not muchach. The Parsha Pshat in the Gemara is, the oinus has to be meforsam. It has to be a very obvious oinus. It has to be something that everyone knows about. Otherwise, people will suspect that you just took a haircut, and people will be suspicious that you're violating the halacha. So it has to be a well-known oinus. So if somebody's let out of jail, then that's a well-known oinus, because Yeshiva news is going to come. Somebody's going to put it on the news that this guy got out of jail, and everyone's going to understand and recognize why this person took a haircut. But says Rav Asher Weiss, wait a second. Why can a sick person who got out of the hospital not take a haircut? Isn't that obvious? I mean, people were mavakar chayla him. Doesn't everybody know he was sick? On the other hand, somebody who is mater neder, he could take a haircut. Who knows that a guy took a neder that he's not going to take a haircut? I mean, you could go to one Talmud Chacham, he could be mater or neder. Why is a haircut something which is muchach, and chayli is something which is not muchach? So says Rav Asher Weiss, if you look carefully in the words of the Mishnah Berurah in his Chachma Yisera addresses this question. The Mishnah Berurah says it's not that the oinus has to be muchach. It's not that it has to be a widespread, blatant, well-known oinus, because sickness is not less known than an eder. It's that the oinus that you're under has to be something that it's obvious that because of that oinus you won't take a haircut. Meaning somebody who could be sick, but not every guy who's sick can take a haircut. So the guy has a strep throat, so he's not going to take a haircut. The guy has an ear infection, he's not going to take a haircut. Not every guy who's sick doesn't take a haircut. So chayli is not a oinus that it's clear precludes you from taking a haircut. A guy lost something, he's looking for his bicycle. So it doesn't mean he can't take a haircut, he could take a break for 20 minutes and take a haircut. Yes, they might be things that everybody knows happen to you, but it's not muchach, that it's something that stops you from taking a haircut. But if a guy was captured, whether people know he was captured or not, everyone understands being captured is something that does not allow you to take a haircut. Everybody knows being in jail is something that doesn't allow you to take a haircut. Even so, jail is something that it's obvious is a reason why someone would not take a haircut. Losing a lost object is not obvious. And therefore, what would you say? If someone came out of quarantine on Chol Hamoed, can they take a haircut? Absolutely.
Why? Is that so obvious?
Nobody knew you were in quarantine. But everybody knows that being in quarantine is a kind of situation that you can't take a haircut because of. It's not that we're worried that people are going to be suspicious of you. It's that if we allow you to take a haircut when the situation wasn't so clear...
What is quarantine considered? Maybe it's like being a captive or being in prison.
Well, then for sure you could take a haircut. But even if it's not considered that...
Why were you in quarantine? Because you were sick or you were trying not to get sick?
For whatever reason.
You're trying not to get sick, you're in prison. So it's good either.
Okay, if you were sick, no, sickness is not...
Right, then you can't take care of baby, but if you were sick...
So he's saying, no, but quarantine is something that it's obvious is a reason that you cannot take a haircut. Sickness does not preclude you.
What about the cover of the second days of Yom Tov?
We're not so concerned about it. We're more... That's Tamakasha. That's Tamakasha. Why do we tell you can't take it? The Iker Kavod is the onset of Yom Tov, the beginning of the Yom Tov. The Mishnah Berurah says very beautifully that it has to be something that is obvious as a reason why not to take a haircut, because if we allow you to take a haircut when you had a situation, let's say you lost an Aveda, and the whole day you looked for your bicycle, and your mamish didn't have a second, but people, if we're going to allow that, that's not really a situation that precluded you from taking a haircut. You happen to have been busy with that. But people are not going to say, people may say that if we allowed someone who lost an object to take a haircut, well, he could have taken it before, so maybe we should let anybody who had anything happen on Erev Yom Tov take a haircut on Chol Hamoed. Everyone's busy Erev Yom Tov. Elamite has to be something that everyone recognizes obvious, a reason that precludes it. In other words, it's not that the oinus has to be muchach, it has to be that the oinus is the type of situation that it's clear you can't take a haircut because of.
What about if a guy gives it to you? Does it make a difference?
Can't do it. Finally, Rav Asher Weiss, in the end of his Sefer, he has a very profound idea, a very powerful thought, and he says this is a thought that he has often when he says the tefillah of Aleinu L'Shabeach. You know, Rav Gamliel jokingly says many people think Aleinu L'Shabeach is tefillah sadarach. You know, you start it in the shul, you say the middle of it out of the shul. You start the Alkain in the car. You finish it when you get home. It's tefillah sadarach. Actually, the Reishis Chachma writes in a sefer, Toitzais Chaim, that it's saying Aleinu is equal to saying Krishma. The power of Aleinu is equal to saying Krishma. In fact, there's one little secret in Aleinu. For those of you who are here, I'll tell you. The Arizal says, Al Kei Nekava, it's in the davening of Yom Naram, right? Al Kei Nekava Chashem Lirois Mehera B'Seferes Uzecha. Mehera ends in a hey. B'Seferes ends in a taf. Uzecha ends in a chaf. That's hey, taf, chaf, hasach. These are one of the shemos of Hashem that vanquishes enemies. And somebody who is machaving to that, he overcomes challenges that day. This is a soifei tevis that appears a number of times throughout the davening. Hey chaftaf, kol haneshama tahalel, azavta darshacha Hashem. This appears many times. Tov shemucha ulecha na'eh lahaydais. This appears many times. But we say in the Aleinu, ki lecha sichra kol barach. One day, God, all of mankind will recognize that to you all knee bows. V'kablu chula masom achusecha, and all of humanity will accept the yoke of your sovereignty. So we make a declaration, Ribono Shel Olam, one day the day will come, Yakir v'yedu kol yeshvei sevel ki lecha sichra kol barach. One day, all nationalities, North Koreans, Syrians, Iranians, Americans even. Can you imagine such a thing? Even Americans. They'll stop tearing down the history of the country and they'll recognize there's actually a God in the universe. That will happen one day. And the Gemara, and Rav Asher Weiss says, you know, when he says these words, it's almost, there's a degree of incredulity over here. And that is, will this ever happen? There's so many nations of the world. There's so many religions in the world. There's so many ethnicities. There's so many progressive ideals in the world. Will the day come that all of mankind will say, God, we bow to you, and all mankind will recognize and accept the sovereignty of the Ribbon Shalom. But, says Rav Asher Weiss, even though we know, Chazal tell us in the Gemara Yevamis, Peronius comes to the world only because of Klal Yisrael, and therefore it is especially incumbent upon every Jew to say, what tshuva do I need to do in order to rectify this matzav that occurred? But more than that, says Rav Asher Weiss, this is a message to the entire world. And the way he sees it is, we know that Titus HaRasha began his assault against Yerushalayim not only with an arrogant declaration against HaKadosh Baruch Hu, against the Beis HaMikdash and Klal Yisrael, but against HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. And he took his sword and he unleashed it in the Paroiches, and blood began to spurt forth. And Titus took the Paroiches and he carried off all the Kalim of the Beis HaMikdash. He carried off the various vessels, and he goes on the boat, and we know it was a very rocky trip, and his ship was threatening to capsize, and he said, "Oh God, I see you're only powerful over the water. You did this to other kings also. You did it to Sisera, you drowned him. You drowned Parai. You only have power over the water." And we remember the Gemara says a bas kol cried out, and he said, "Rasha, ben Rasha, ben Benoy shel Esav HaRasha. You think I only have power over the water? Come onto the dry land, and we'll fight on the dry land. I have this little tiny creature. It's called a yitush. It's called a gnat, and I could defeat you with this tiny little creature." And that's what God did. Titus came off the ship, and the little gnat flew up his nose and started pecking at his brain. And actually, if you read Josephus, even though Titus, in the beginning of his life, was a very cruel and barbaric, according to Roman history, at the end of his life, he became very kind-hearted and soft. And Victor Meller writes, of course he did. When you have a bird pecking in your brain, it changes your personality a little bit. But the Rebbeinu Shalom shows the Balei Gaiva that he doesn't need big arsenal to take them down. Well, says Rav Asher Weiss, it's the same thing with modern man. Modern man thinks he's conquered the universe. He could send the rocket ship, he could land man on the moon, he could land a rocket ship on Mars. In his hand, he could hold a device, obviously not in a shul, but anywhere else, and he could turn it on, and he could figure out what's happening anywhere in the whole world. Within milliseconds, a person knows everything that's happening everywhere in the world. He could see everything that's happening in the world. He has access. You want food, you just press a button, and in 10 minutes, they deliver it to your house. Modern man thought he had it all figured out. He thought he has this world figured out. He doesn't need God. Any refuah, he just punches it into his little device. Modern man thought, Ribbono Shel Olam, I'm immaculate. Ribbono Shel Olam, I'm invincible. So Ribbono Shel Olam says, really? You're invincible? I have a little tiny creature, man. Uvirus Shemai. It's even smaller than a gnat. A gnat is actually trillions of times bigger than this virus. This virus, you could barely see it on a microscope. This virus, even the greatest minds, they cannot predict how it will mutate, where it will go next. Will there be a second wave? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? How do you treat it? Hydrochloroquine, not hydrochloroquine, zinc, yes zinc, no zinc. Nobody knows. Is it coming back? Do you have immunity? Does immunity last for more than a day? Does it last more than a week? Does it last more than a month? Nobody knows. God says, world, I'm going to shut you down for 3 months. What did Ribbono Shel Olam do? He dropped an atom bomb on the world? Had Mars collided with planet Earth? No, not even a gnat. A tiny microscopic virus. Hashem says, Adam, Beria Kala Yeshli, I have a tiny little creature, Uvirus Shemai, and with this virus I could shut you all down. Your economy, your shuls, your stores, your businesses, everything that you do, close up shop.
So it's not China's fault.
I didn't say that might be their fault, but they might be the shulchan. Says the Bereshis Rabbah, God did not only do this to Titus HaRasha. Kach darkoi shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu lasoi shlichusai al yidei dvarim kalim. God routinely carries out His mission through very, very small things. L'chol hamizgoyin olav, to all who are arrogant against Him. Shalach lehem beria kala. Says Rav Asher Weiss, we have seen in our time, ki l'cha sichra kol berach. All of mankind has basically got down on their knees and says, Almighty, we're powerless. We still have not come to the madrega of v'kablu chulam esal malchusecha. But if you want to know when will the day come, ki l'cha tichra kol berach, it doesn't take God much. He doesn't need a lot at His disposal. He could take even the smallest thing and turn over the world with the smallest thing. So we should be zoiche that the Rebbeinu Shalom should be merachim on us, and we should learn all the lessons and all the halachos that we're intended to from this. And Be'ezus Hashem, next week we'll continue with Parshas Chukas. Thanks everyone for coming. Bracha v'atzlacha. Shkayach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.